Welcome back. The topic of today's video is still death. In the last episode, we talked about the topic of artistic heritage sites. We talked about modern art, which broke the boundaries of art and destroyed the barriers of art regulated by elitism and dogma, returning art to the people. Along with art, our ideals were also returned to us. Art, once an ideal and symbol of beauty, has moved from its former position of being merely admired to becoming an integral part of our lives. This means that if we believe art is dead, it is no different from acknowledging that ideals have been eradicated, and the flickering flame of our own existence will also be extinguished. From a philosophical perspective, we concluded that the death of art is currently only a concern, not a reality. However, if we continue to reflect deeply on the above issues, we cannot help but turn the topic to another heavy issue connected to death: suicide. This can also be interpreted as whether there is such a thing as the collapse of ideals. Perhaps, as a serious topic in the fields of philosophy and art, suicide should be the best subject to examine. Whether this state has ever appeared or is currently appearing. Here, let us first consider a question, or rather, let us imagine together what it would look like if we were to choose suicide. How would we go about killing ourselves? I will volunteer to share my thoughts first. A sharp knife, a sturdy rope, gentle water, a high rooftop, a bottle of lethal chemicals, or perhaps, as often depicted in TV dramas, slowly suffocating oneself by burning oxygen until death. I've thought about this for a long time, imagining it endlessly, even envisioned my own death, and whether anyone would mourn my absence. I've considered the self-pitying narcissism and self-love that come with such thoughts. Death has become a personal fantasy for me. I can't help but imagine what happens after death and the preparations made before it arrives. But I really think about the process of dying itself. It seems that as though the process of dying is severed in an instant. We think about preparations before death and matters after death more than the death itself. Now, let us organize the act of suicide into a few categories. Through the previous imagination, we have already derived a specific reason for why we choose to take our lives. We need not to share that reason is. What we need to do is reveal it in our own minds. The first type of suicide is what we commonly refer to as a happy suicide. This may sound strange to you, so let us use a more familiar term: willingly accepting death, or bravely facing death. For those who commit suicide, this type of suicide often means that death is the only path to liberation. We call it happy suicide because terms like willingly accepting death or bravely facing death do not adequately describe the state of mind of the person committing suicide. Yeah, the terms joyful father and son or generous father and son often carry a certain sense of resistance. The happy suicide we are referring to does not involve any resistance. It is not an attempt to oppose the existing world or the social reality one is in. It is a subtle psychological state, a longing for death, revealing a sense of confusion. Of course, The confusion we are referring to here is not its literal sense. The confusion we are talking about is the individual confusion revealed by death, as described in the first discussion on death, which carries a hint of madness. The second type of suicide is what we commonly refer to as painful suicide, due to the accumulation of pain, whether physical or mental. The individual, unable to find release, chooses death as the means of venting. Death becomes an expression of accusation, but its essence is not to oppose the world or the hardships of life brought by social reality. Painful suicide often targets the suicidal individual themselves, as they judge their present and past, leading to a future path shrouded in the shadows of death. Moral consciousness attributes such suicides to cowardice, and kindness can only humbly serve as a footnote to cowardice. However, we must all be clear that judging oneself is merely a fainting spell in the embrace of death, and it is absolutely not an expression of cowardice, but rather a manifestation of courage. As the famous saying of existentialist philosophers or nihilists goes, for most people in the world, truly judging, examining, and evaluating oneself is an extremely difficult task. This suicide is no longer merely the gaze of madness, but a direct pointing. Madness itself has been avoided. Who has compromised with madness? The third type of suicide, which we commonly refer to as calm suicide, is cruel, swift, and methodical, often giving the illusion of being thoughtfulness, as if death were as inevitable as having a lunch, as farewell, as easy as waving goodbye. Such suicide are rarely described as uncontrolled. In other words, they have nothing to do with madness or insanity. They are the most appropriate judgment made by rational mind. Death is neither a path to liberation nor the result of self-accusation and judgment, but a goal, a purpose that must be achieved. This is the classification of suicide. I suspect many viewers may be confused, as the types of suicide we have described seem to omit many aspects, such as impulsive suicide or pathological suicide. The reason we did not mention them is that the term impulsive suicide does not exist. The term itself contains a contradiction. The reason for this contradiction is that in the logical sequence of self-destruction, we always overlook one thing. We have already asked you to interpret that the thing for ourselves. Exactly, is what we just mentioned. We overlook the process of death, the process by which death occurs. In an instant, it is severed. 1 second, a person is happy and content. The next second, they decisively end their own life. The entire process of death is not merely the 2 seconds between those moments. When imagining suicidal behavior, we may give ourselves various reasons, but most people overlook one crucial point. The reason that leads us to believe we can end our lives is not something decided in the moment. Its origins may trace back much further, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or even a lifetime. Death has already laid the groundwork for each of our lives. It is merely a glimpse of what lies ahead. At this point, you will undoubtedly realize that what we have described is not a type of suicide, but rather the gradual formation of suicidal intent in the mind. The 3 stages of this process all reveal another thing. The person contemplating suicide does not actually deny the entire world. The absurdity lies in the fact that when we view suicide from the perspective of the world and through the lenses of social reality, we find that both the world and social reality are actively denying the suicidal individual. This is also why, when we imagine ourselves committing suicide, we overlook the process of death and find that the process of death is abruptly cut off in an instant. Because what we are doing is not imagination, but reflection and criticism. What is being reflected upon and criticized is not the world or society, but our own existence, which acts and exists within the world and society. Therefore, philosophers have argued that such suicide is not a negation of the self, but rather a profound affirmation of one's existence. In other words, the process of death has already been meticulously unfolded through our individual life experiences. We overlook this process because we have implicitly acknowledged the meaning and value of our own existence, regardless of how others judge our own existence. We have already affirmed our own existence. When we imagine suicide, it is as if we have severed our connection with the secular world, causing ourselves existence to burn more fiercely and brilliantly than ever before. If we must establish a contrast for such thinking to make it easier to understand, it would be to imagine how someone close to us or a complete stranger might commit suicide. We could find that in such imagination, to construct a logical framework, we must refer to their life journey. That is, the process of their death, while repeatedly ignoring our own. The real world and the social realities rooted in it often throws distractions our way, causing us to forget our own existence. It is only when we contemplate death that we inadvertently touch upon it, only to let it slip through our fingers. The secular concepts established by social reality, where value judgments are distorted by the primacy of monetary attributes, compel us to seek solace from death. Confusion, perhaps, is the most fertile ground for a fleeting affair with death in this era. There is a group that has long seen through the essence of the secular world and grown weary of the distractions it brings, making them the most prominent, or rather the most scrutinized suicide groups. This group is poets. Some scholars have written that humanity must rely on scientific and technological means to enhance and expand its survival capabilities. Social history inevitably evolves towards more secure, comfortable, and proactive stages of existence. However, like national social systems, science and technology are established by people, yet they become objective forces that suffocate the value and meaning of human existence. Today, human history has entered the technological age, and this contradiction has not only failed to be resolved, but has become even more pronounced. On one hand, the world is filled with computers, air conditioners, bedrooms, and luxury cars. On the other hand, it is plagued by war, drug abuse, and suicide. And the topic that most captures our attention today is the suicide of poets. Almost all of the greatest poets of the last century chose suicide. When we look at them through the lens of today's secular culture, their suicide seems utterly incomprehensible. The fame and status of such poets clearly do not justice the logic of suicide. Impulsive suicide is merely an illusion created by the secular world. Do those who commit impulsive suicide regret afterwards? Like a problem that cannot be established as a problem, the suicide of poets seems to form a paradox. However, if we step away from secular thinking, we quickly discover the crux of the matter. That is, most poets, especially the top-tier ones, are completely detached from the secular world. In the eyes of societal reality, they are heretics and odious. Therefore, their death process has already transcended what we can speculate or imagine. Material wealth, love, the shadows of childhood, and other life disasters. The secular casualty established by secular culture cannot reconstruct their death process. The only thing that can unlock this dilemma is the collapse of ideals. True poets cannot accept the fact that their ideals have been shattered, which is what we discussed in the fourth talk. The inability to accept the true existence of the self, gradually being stripped away and replaced by the secular world and social reality, unwilling to engage in the struggles of the secular world, yet unable to resolve the existential challenges brought by technological development. They gradually transition from joyful suicide to painful suicide to a rational, calm departure from this world. Does the poet's departure prove that art has grown weak or is inevitably destined to fade away? Yeah, our view still remains the same. The death of art is merely a concern, and the poet's departure has merely drawn a line through this concern, making it evident to us. As many of these great minds have summarized, suicide is merely an individual murdering their own body. Their will and ideas remain undiminished. The poet's self-judgment and their resolute determination to embrace death stem from an affirmation of their own existence, not a negation of it. Therefore, we can still sense their ideas and paths they sought in the poems and texts they left behind. This reflection on death, the manifestation of self-existence and suicide, inevitably leads us to another topic, the body. As hinted at in the passage often cited in aesthetic theory, he wrote that in ancient society, the imagination of youth and the maturity of reason were intertwined. However, due to the development of culture and technology, people have become fragmented, objectified, and reduced to mere symbols of professional and scientific knowledge. This is akin to expressing a viewpoint under the technological regulations of modern civilization. We have rigidly constructed our bodies to conform to social reality, using them as secular symbols, which has caused modern people to lose their sense of belonging, the very existence we have long forgotten. We will discuss the topic of the body in the next episode. This episode will conclude here, marking the first late night broadcast for this channel. Thank you for listening and watching. We will see you next time.